Hey, everyone, just a quick heads up that we have some exciting news for you about the future of Top of Mind and a brand new podcast I hope you'll love. So stay tuned for all the details at the end of today's episode.
This was the first time that I realized the traditional system doesn't work for everyone.
And instead of even just a small moment of pausing, I sat with those thoughts.
My opinion was definitely strong, and so I was hoping to find someone that matched that.
I had a turnaround moment, or a stick with it moment, as we call it, right?
And so it opened up a new level of empathy for me.
I'm Julie Rose, and this is Top of Mind. I have been a radio journalist for 2 decades, but a few years ago, I found myself avoiding the news for long stretches because of how depressing and divisive it all seems. I still wanted to be informed and engaged on important issues, though, and I figured I couldn't be alone in that. So we created this podcast. Each week, we tackle one tough topic in a way that will challenge you, help you feel more empathy, and empower you to become a better citizen, a kinder neighbor, and a more effective advocate. Today, we're going behind the scenes with the Top of Mind team. We talk a lot about how one of our goals with the podcast is to challenge listeners to consider different perspectives, to stay open and curious as we explore the nuance of an issue. It can lead to more empathy and clarity, which are core to our mission as a podcast. But look, it is not an easy task. I get that. It is tough to set aside our arguments and listen with an open mind to a perspective we really disagree with. So today we're turning the tables. Each of us on the Top of Mind team has been challenged by a perspective while working on a recent episode. We've worked hard to stick with the discomfort of that and stay curious rather than shut down. So we've got 5 quick stories for you of stick-with-it moments tied to recent episodes of Top of Mind. If a similar experience comes to mind for you as you're listening, make sure to reach out. I would love to hear your story. Our email is topofmind@byu.edu.
I'm Alayna Beck. I'm from Boise, Idaho, and I've been with Top of Mind for about a year now.
Alayna, it's great to have you. Thanks for coming in.
Of course.
So what is the episode that brought a stick-with-it moment for you?
The Motivation in Education episode, where we addressed how students are really struggling in the current education system and what ways are people trying different things to improve it for them.
So what was the perspective that challenged you?
So we interviewed a high school English teacher named Sarah Schopfer, and she was talking about this new grading system she was trying out. I believe her district was trying it out, but she was a big fan.
Right.
And, it was getting rid of letter grades, the typical A, B, C, D, F.
Right.
And it replaced that with just a number system, 1 through 4. And she describes that as working with skills instead of points. And
right, so it was very much focused on you get a 1 if you are able to do it with a lot of teacher support, and here it's this basic skill can you write a thesis statement, and 4 is you're able to kind of go beyond what we discussed in the class, right? So it was really focused on competency of specific skills. And what was it that was challenging to you about that?
Exactly. So when I was in school, my school system also changed to that system.
Oh.
And I was one of those students that hated it, absolutely hated it, because I was the point chaser that she described. I was the overachiever that obsessed over rubrics and loved getting A's and was nitpicking with the teacher over every half point. Well, why didn't I get this?
So when your school did away with the ability to get an A,
yes.
I mean, what was that like for you? What was upsetting to you about that?
Well, I felt like you were taking away my hard work. The way that I had measured myself for my whole life was I got an A. That's amazing. But then you were taking that away from me, and I was consistently getting 3s, and I didn't understand why being a point chaser didn't make me motivated to learn.
So let's take a listen to a little bit of Sarah Schopfer from this episode. She's a 11th and 12th grade English teacher in Northern California. And here she is talking about why she felt like the traditional grading, A, B, C, D, F, was not working for her and her students.
A student who is constantly at that F level because it's so hard on a traditional 0 to 100% scale to climb out of that F level range, which is 59% of the scale is an F. How demotivating is that? Like, no matter what you do, if you are averaging grades out, that student is never going to be able to pull themselves out, right? So that definitely resulted in a lot of kids giving up. And then on the flip side, those high-achieving kids who are going to do whatever you tell them to do because that's who they are, their motivation is less about learning and more about how many points can I get if I do this? Or I have enough points to not do the final.
She's describing you there at the end, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Alayna, a stick with it moment always includes this sort of decision point, right? Where you have a reaction to information that disagrees with your worldview, and instead of shutting it down or dismissing it or getting defensive, you choose to do something different, to maybe stay open, curious, somehow engage with that information. So what was that moment for you?
So obviously I was working on this episode every day, and I heard her explanation and I was like, okay, I can maybe see, but like I still was in my
Rejection mode.
Narrow-minded perspective.
Yeah.
And then around the same time, my sister, she's 15, she's about the same age that I was when my district switched, and she just wasn't going to school. She wasn't doing the work. She would like have people bring the work to her and she would barely do anything. And my parents were really struggling with it. The whole family was like, we don't know how to help her. We don't want her to drop out. And this was the first time that I realized that the traditional system doesn't work for everyone. And this
And so is your sister's in a school where they're doing the traditional A through F grade, 0 to 100.
Just a regular public high school.
Okay.
Traditional A through F, and she was getting Fs, and she felt like, well, I'm stuck here, so
why try?
Why try? Why do I care? And it wasn't until like somebody close to me, personal, I mean, she's my sister, I love her, and I didn't realize that, I see why this is more fair now. This is for the students that are not like me.
You find yourself wishing that she did have a zero, have a grading system
the
more
1
like
through
what you
4.
had, that you hated so much. Interesting.
Yes. So, I mean, it seems very narrow-minded now, and I'm like, oh, of course. But it wasn't until this moment that I realized, oh, I see what Sarah Schopfer is saying, and if my school district were still doing the 1 through 4 system, then my sister wouldn't be in this situation.
Interesting. Yeah, I do find that sometimes it does take it takes a change in our world, in our life experience. It takes some kind of a crisis to crack us open to the ability to be open to information that we had been shutting down previously. And so it's interesting. I mean, I'm sorry that your family has been struggling with this and that your sister is so struggling. But that would come along, and now you go back and you listen to Sarah Schopfer with that openness, and I imagine you're hearing an entirely different conversation because you're actually hearing it with different ears.
Yeah, exactly. When she's describing those students at the beginning that are just like the 59% of the points that you can get is just failure, I can see how that feels like you're drowning in it.
Yeah. Alayna, thank you very much for sharing this with us today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'm Vanessa Goodman. I've been a producer on Top of Mind for about 1.5 years now. So one of the recent episodes we did that gave me a stick with it moment for sure was the youth mental health episode.
Right, about how teens are struggling. And we looked at some of the avenues that where they might be struggling or that might be useful to help them. Medication, we looked at sleep deprivation, we looked at social media and cell phone use. So what was the perspective that challenged you?
Yeah, so I was really excited to work on this episode, actually. I've had a lot of experience working with teens, and lots of teens struggle with their mental health. And so I knew from the beginning we couldn't avoid the topic of social media. I know that when I was growing up, social media was kind of becoming a newer thing. And so my parents were very adamant that, social media is probably bad for mental health. You probably shouldn't be on it. But as a teenager, I didn't want to believe them because it was fun, of course.
So you were on social media anyway?
Yes, I was. Yeah,
Okay.
I think I got Instagram when I was probably 13.
Okay.
Maybe 12.
Yeah.
And so
How'd that go for you?
I mean, at first it was great. I had a lot of fun. I mostly just followed my family members, and like cousins and friends from school. But as I started to get older, my relationship with social media kind of started to deteriorate. And I don't think that that was the only reason I struggled as a teenager, but I definitely don't think it was helpful for me. Just seeing, posts from people like my friends that made me want to compare myself with them, or like people on the internet. And it just I spent a lot of time on it. And so as I've grown older, that was something I've always regretted doing, for sure, because I felt like I wasted so much time. And definitely now, as an adult, I don't think I have an ideal relationship with social media. I still spend more time on it than I would like, but I've definitely improved my relationship with social media. I'm on it a lot less. I feel like I think about it in a more nuanced, safe way than I did as a teenager, but I always look back and I'm like, if I had never gotten an Instagram, if I could go back, I would tell myself not to get on social media at such a young age.
So if you regretted having been on social media as a teenager, is it fair to say then that when you were approaching this episode, looking for a guest to talk about social media and its effect on teens and mental health, you were hoping to or expecting to find an expert who would basically confirm your experience? Social media is bad for teenagers. They shouldn't be on it.
Yeah, for sure. My opinion was definitely strong and defined. And so I was hoping to find someone that matched that with hopefully some great research to back it up. We just pop it in the episode and hopefully get people to think the way that I thought about it.
Maybe save some teenagers from the experience that you had had as a kid. Okay. Well, so here comes the stick with it moment then, where you face challenging information and have to lean into it, partly because it's your job, but also because you want to understand better. So what was that perspective, or was there a particular guest that came to you in that moment and you thought, oh gosh, I really need to think this through?
Yeah, so when I came across Dr. Sarah Coyne's research, it really challenged me because it was more in the middle. She didn't say like all teens should have social media. She didn't say we should ban social media completely, but she did make some really good points backed in clear evidence that social media maybe wasn't as bad for teens as I thought.
And even in some cases, I mean, that's something that I was surprised by as I was speaking to her, because Sarah Coyne at Brigham Young University has done some of the most in-depth research on the effects of social media on teens in some really innovative ways, right? Where you're looking not just at big groups of teens, like here are the teens with social media and here are the teens without, but looking at the actual individual level, following a teenager over the course of their life and finding, for example, the length of time spent on social media did not predict how bad a teen's mental health would be. And then she's done a lot of work to figure out, okay, so what is the effect? And like you said, was not going to back up your sort of perspective that we should ban it, right? Just take it off the table for teenagers. And so how did you feel when you started to encounter that information?
I was, like I said, very hesitant at first because it wasn't the easy answer that I wanted to find, which I think happens often when we're trying to solve problems. But this perspective just seemed a lot more complicated than I had originally thought. And so to find it and to feel like it was relevant enough to include was hard for me, because it was kind of letting go of some of those preconceived notions that I had. But at the same time, it allowed me to open up and really listen to what she was trying to say and the recommendations she was giving, which helped me to refine my perspective a little more and find a little bit more peace with it. And also some new ideas that I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah. So you identified for us a clip from that episode where she's giving some explanation as to why she thinks outright banning social media or like keeping teens off of it is not the most productive approach. Let's listen to a bit of that.
I think the best analogy for me is driving a car. We don't just give teenagers a car and say, go for it. We train them up, right? You have to take classes, you have to practice, you have to do the time to learn how to be a safe driver. And then we also install safety features in cars, like seatbelts and airbags, to make them safer for people who drive it. And I feel like that's a nice way to look at social media, right? Again, it's just a tool. It can be used for good or for bad. If we don't train our adolescents and kids, they're going to crash and burn.
That's a clip from our recent episode about teen mental health and some of the things that we can do to help teens. And Dr. Coyne goes on to explain a number of what that training can look like for teens to help them to not crash and burn. And so, Vanessa, I'm curious, have you changed your own mind about teenagers and social media?
Definitely. Yeah. I had a big perspective shift as I listened to her thoughts and to that interview. I love the analogy she used because I think it really places the emphasis on learning and growing. And adolescence is such a time to do that. It's the time to establish your habits. It's the time to become who you are. And I think that it's important to be able to trust teenagers that they can make their own decisions with the proper help, because social media is part of our world. And there are so many ways it can be used for good. But if teenagers aren't given the tools to explore that and maybe make some mistakes along the way and learn some lessons along the way, even if they're hard, if they don't get that opportunity to practice and try, it's going to be worse for them because it's kind of unavoidable in our day, honestly. And so it changed my perspective to trust teenagers a little more and to place the emphasis more on helping them instead of restricting them, especially in this crucial phase of their life. And it kind of helped me have a little bit more empathy for my past self that did, spend a lot of time on social media, maybe not doing the things that I wish I would have been doing at that time, because I've learned from that, and I've learned more about how I want to navigate that sphere today. And I feel like that's helped me become a more well-rounded person.
Vanessa, thank you for sharing this with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
We're giving you a behind-the-scenes look today at some of the stick-with-it moments we've had as a top-of-mind team while putting the podcast together recently. I'd love to know if one of the episodes we just talked about challenged you. Tell me about that, or about any time when you've stayed curious and you chose to stick with it in your home or work or school life. Email your story to topofmind@byu.edu. We love hearing your stories and your feedback. And we read all the reviews listeners leave on podcast apps, too, if you can believe it. Here is one, for example, from KatyMG6 on Apple Podcasts that really made my day. I really appreciate that this show does not reduce issues to black and white thinking. Rather, Julie helps us explore the complexities of difficult topics. More of this is needed in our conversations. Thank you, KatyMG6, for that, and I totally agree. So now let's get back to some more stick-with-it stories from the Top of Mind team.
I'm Amber Mortensen. I've been a producer at Top of Mind for about a year now.
Amber, it's so great to have you in. So what is the episode that you want to talk about that has given you a stick-with-it experience?
The episode in the last group of episodes that gave me the most stick-with-it was the one on unions, labor unions. For my entire life up until this point, I've had a negative view of unions.
Why is that? What has that been shaped by?
It's been shaped by my parents' experiences with unions. My mom's worked in education a lot. She pretty much has had nothing good to say about teachers' unions and staff unions in that sphere. And then when I was a kid, she got really, really ill. It's complicated, but in short, her blood started killing itself off. And she was in the hospital, and she was very ill. At the time, she didn't tell us exactly how ill she was, but it was still a terrifying experience for me.
It does sound terrifying. What does that have to do with unions?
Well, you see, we lived in California, and California nurse and doctor unions, and just the entire system there, as was actually discussed in the episode, she was at a Kaiser hospital. And they've had a lot of challenges between the medical system and the nurses went on strike at a very key point in her treatment.
Wow. Okay. And so what did that mean for her?
That meant that the doctor who was working with her had to make some interesting choices and prepare early, because if she had a problem, they wouldn't have been able to help. Her condition had been recovering, but it had been recovering for 3 days, and then it would go back to worse 3 days later. And so it was a really big fluctuation. And the nurses being out for this key moment in her treatment, if it had gone back down, she would have died. I remember as we were starting to work on the episode, I looked at my coworker, Alayna, and we shared our different perspectives on this because her perspective on unions was very positive. Her dad works with them, and she was having a hard time understanding why anyone would have a hard time with unions. And I turned around in my chair because she works right behind me, and I was like, what are you talking about? And so we got into a really interesting for me conversation about, oh, this is important. And she was like, I don't know what episode direction to take on this because I've always been in support. And I'm like, I have never been in support. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was an opportunity. Obviously, you both had sort of blind spots when it came to, why would someone think this about unions when it's so clearly your perspective had been shaped by your own life experience?
At the start of that conversation, we did not understand each other.
Okay. Well, I'd love to hear it. I mean, this is why you guys work on this show, because you're good at this and you're willing to have these tough conversations that I know a lot of us will steer clear of. Was there any perspective that came about in the episode itself, in the research itself, that brought new clarity to you about, or even shifted your perspective at all about organized labor?
Yeah. So I find that in life, a lot of things tend to stack up in the right ways. So just before we were doing the episode, there was the SAG-AFTRA writer union strike that was already sort of tearing down my negative perceptions of unions because that's the industry that I'm going into. And those are the topics and requests that they were asking for were things like pay overtime, do background checks when people work with children, pay children, don't have actors do nude auditions, things like that, where you look at it, penalize studios for denying meal breaks. Why are these things needing to be demanded?
So all of a sudden you were relating, partly because it's your, it
affects me.
Yeah, you plan to be part of this union in your professional career.
And so it opened up a new level of empathy for me, at least in the sense of examining why are they striking? And looking at the purposes as covered, I was like, no, they need to strike. This is important.
Amber, a stick with it experience always involves, as we define it, always involves a conscious choice that you make to stay open, to stay curious, to lean into some information that you disagree with or lean into a conversation that you'd really rather not have. So can you identify one moment where you wanted to dismiss, but instead you leaned in to the discomfort?
Yeah. One of my career advisors was talking to me, and he was telling me about his experience in the union and telling me about the healthcare and how that saved his family and supported him. And I could not look this man in the eye and say, you're wrong, because he wasn't. And then talking to Alayna, and her dad's been on the front lines of so much of this, and looking at the demands that, even though they were rejected, were finally accepted by SAG-AFTRA and the studios. And then looking this man in the eye, who I massively respect.
This mentor of yours,
yes.
This career advisor.
And looking my mentor in the eye and going, I respect what you're saying, and I'm listening.
I'm not just going to dismiss this based on my negative perception of unions. Yeah.
Something in the episode that has just stuck in my brain since is these aren't your parents' unions. And I think things have changed a lot. And sure, there's still a lot of really necessary jobs, and there's going to be situations like what happened with my mom. But the level of passion and the level of hopefulness is also important for me to consider. And I am considering it now.
Amber, thank you for sharing this story with us today.
Yeah, it's actually just absolutely my pleasure.
Hello, I'm Samuel Benson, and I am a producer for Top of Mind. My Stick With It experience was from our teen mental health episode that we did, which was kind of covering some of the different ways that, or that teens generally are struggling with their mental health, and we kind of identified a couple different ways that we can address it.
Right. We were talking about medication, about sleep, and also about social media. What was the perspective that challenged you?
For me, it was that first one, which was medication, and it comes at the very beginning of the episode. We had a guest named Brooke Seam who shares her experience with being medicated for some mental health issues she was struggling with. She also had lost her father.
So she was grieving, anxiety, depression, and she was a teenager when she got medicated.
She was, yeah.
And her story's pretty negative. She's pretty convinced that the medicine ultimately didn't serve her well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. What I struggled with this story was it was hard for me to... It felt like she was sort of blaming medication for her problems when the way I was seeing it was more like her choice to stick with medication that maybe wasn't right for her, and also she eventually, by the advice of her doctor, quit her medication sort of cold turkey and went through all of these horrible experiences several years later.
Yeah.
But and just she was being super, super negative on using medication to help teens with their mental
Why did that
health.
rub you wrong?
Yeah. So I am someone who has been using medication to help with my specific mental health issues for many, many years. And I've had a very positive experience. And I know many other people in my life, family, friends who have also been taking them, different ones for years, and have had, and not to say they haven't had like maybe some negative experience, but they, worked with their doctor, maybe got on a different one or picked a different one and then had a positive experience.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. So Samuel, what was your instinct then when you were hearing Brooke Seam's story, where she is expressing a very different experience and perspective on medication? What did you want to do in that moment?
Yeah, my initial reaction was to be like defensive and and also to kind of want to like discredit her and to be like, oh, your experience is wrong, or like it's invalid or whatever.
Yeah, dismissive. And totally understable. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And just different.
I think
than
we
what
feel
I'd
like
seen.
that a lot of times when we encounter something that just really goes against our own life experience. We're like, well, you're wrong.
Yeah, but I had a turnaround moment, or a stick with it moment, as we call it, right? And I had the realization that something that's really important to remember, that everyone's like mental health journey and everyone's medication journey is deeply personal. Like everyone has to go everyone who's had to go through that goes through it in a different way. And the important thing was that her negative experience that she had did not take away and does not take away from the positive experiences I've had and continue to have with medication for mental health. Like it doesn't, just because she had a bad experience doesn't suddenly make it so like my good experiences are invalid. And I think I had to realize that I was being defensive, but I wasn't being attacked. Like she wasn't saying to me like, you shouldn't be taking your antidepressant or what. Like she wasn't saying that to me as a listener. Like if you're doing this, it's bad and you shouldn't be doing it. Like it was wrong for me, and it was, we should be careful with it, which I agree with. And I was like, oh, I was being defensive when I didn't need to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You're humble and kind and vulnerable to share that. I appreciate that, Samuel.
Sure.
Because I think it's a really important insight into something that is so easy, happens for us, so many of us all the time, that our initial reaction is to feel threatened, to feel defensive, to feel like, well, need to kind of validate ourselves, right? Which is just sort of a natural human thing. And I think it's so hard to be able to sit to kind of hold like both things can be true. I can validate your experience and also my experience can be valid. And the cognitive dissonance that is inevitable in that moment is uncomfortable. It's the essence of sticking
absolutely.
with it, is to be okay with these contradictory things long enough to be able to remember that there's a human being on the other side of this issue who's also having their own. And this is true with every single issue that we feel strongly about,
Absolutely.
that we're deeply personally invested in. When we encounter a perspective that's very opposite or challenging to our own, we want to make it personal and we want to lash out in some way or shut it down. But it's just so much more productive if we can hold space for that discomfort in the moment.
Yeah, and also I think there was the idea, like, I felt like it almost like that defensiveness was making me like, I would have like ignored the struggle and like the suffering that she was experiencing, and I was like, that's not fair, like, to her, you know, like, she's a human being who suffered with these things, and it's like, why is my initial response to be like, your suffering's invalid, or it's, you know, it's whatever, like, it's, you know, I think I could move towards more of a feeling this sympathy. I had not experienced what she experienced, like, oh, the sympathy, like, it sucks that that's something that you had to go through, you know, and had to experience, like, and rather than it was, you were wrong for experiencing that. I got to a better place with that, I think.
Yeah. And ideally, this is something that happens for all of us as we have these stick with it moments when we're encountering these perspectives within top of mind episodes, that ideally it's like strengthening that muscle just a little bit so that we're better at extending that kind of grace in our personal lives.
Definitely.
With other people. Samuel, thank you so much. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you, Julie.
Okay, now it is my turn. So the episode we did recently on how much transparency is ideal in a democracy challenged me. I have never been good at taking no for an answer. It's partly why I was drawn to journalism. You get to ask questions and demand access to stuff in the name of press freedom. My stance has always been that when it comes to government and elected officials, the more open, the better. So I struggled to stay open-minded while talking to the politicians in that episode about why they think sometimes it's better for certain government dealings to be kept secret. The real kicker for me, though, came when I was speaking to Stanford political scientist Bruce Kane. And he talked about how openness can sometimes fuel political gridlock.
Once you take a stand in public, it's very hard to say, oh, you know what? You know, that business about cutting taxes, never mind. Yeah. We'll make a compromise. Not that I want to be an advocate for people going into the back room, smoking cigars and cutting deals and not telling the public. But, at some point, if you can't back down, it's not just that people can monitor you, but then the groups threaten you by not giving you campaign funds, right? And then all of a sudden you're stuck not doing the business of compromise, which is absolutely essential the way we've set up the American political system. And I don't want to say the polarization is totally due to transparency. I think it's just another piece of the puzzle that locks us in.
I had never connected those two things, political gridlock and government transparency. And it turns out there is more nuance than I had been allowing on this issue. Leaning into that discomfort has led me to be a lot less insistent on openness at all costs. Every time I see a news article now about state lawmakers trying to restrict access to government records and deliberations, I read it carefully rather than jump immediately to assuming that they're just trying to abuse their power. Now, here's one final story of sticking with it from a member of the Top of Mind team.
My name is James Hoops, and I'm a producer here on Top of Mind.
Thanks for coming in, James. It's always good to have you in the studio with me instead of behind the scenes working on all the research and the scripting.
Thanks.
So what episode presented you with a stick with it moment?
Yeah, so my stick with it moment came during our episode about homelessness. We were sort of looking to investigate why it feels like it's an issue that's so hard to solve and looking at maybe places that are doing some innovative things to address it.
So what was the perspective that challenged you that you had to sort of stick with?
Right, yeah, so it actually wasn't an angle that we ended up incorporating in the final episode, but came up in our research. And it was about sort of how we refer to homeless people and homelessness.
Like what words
we use. Yeah, exactly. So you'll hear unhoused, individuals or people experiencing homelessness. You'll also sometimes hear homeless versus houseless, sort of this idea of like people first identity language.
Interesting. Houseless. That is not one that would ever have rolled off my tongue.
Saw a few little blog posts about it. And
Okay.
initially I was reading sort of these perspectives about how important it was to like be specific about our language. And I wanted to roll my eyes a little bit. I was like, how much is really there to investigate?
So this was a possible angle that we were considering. You know, is there something with regard to how we talk about homelessness,
Right.
That
can help us see the issue more clearly.
Right. Think about new ways to solve it.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were
And
sort
I was
of not
thinking,
having it.
no, because I feel like I've seen that sort of conversation shut down sort of good faith dialogue a little bit, and sometimes it can feel a little bit moralizing in a way that
Like you're
feels
policing the
unproductive to me.
language
Yeah.
rather than sort of just focusing on the issue.
Right. So I was pretty ready to dismiss all of it and be like, it doesn't really matter. I think as long as we understand the heart of the issue, it doesn't matter what words we're using.
Interesting. Okay. But you chose to lean in to that
Right.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you?
Yeah. So I kept researching, partly because it was my job and partly because it was interesting to read all of these different perspectives about how it is important to be very specific, even though they were all being specific in different sort of ways. But one interview in particular actually really changed my perspective on this. And it was an interview at a TV station in Portland, KGW, with a woman named Kaya Sand. She works for a organization called Street Roots, an alternative newspaper in Portland that's for homeless individuals, covers homeless topics, and she was talking about this issue.
Yeah, we have the audio of that. It's about 30 seconds long, so let's go ahead and listen.
So it's really getting across that idea that people create homes when they're in their tents, when they're in their communities. And so that's why more and more folks who are houseless have been promoting that term. And I love that. I love how it's a way of keeping our language fresh. Like it keeps us on our toes, because there's a way in which I think we can just start to flatten out what the idea is to be homeless. So if we have to re-engage in a new way, I think it's actually healthy for all of us.
So she's explaining there a little bit the difference. Like people who are homeless actually have homes. What they don't have is a house, because if home is where your heart is, or I don't know, kind of talking about like the notion of a place of belonging and safety. And so what is it that affected you about what she was saying there?
Yeah, I guess it just sort of flew in the face of my initial thoughts that sort of there wasn't any use to being specific about language.
No
and
value
policing.
about
no
policing
value,
the language
right.
itself around this issue.
And she offered this perspective that made me realize when people do that, it's an invitation to lean in and to re-engage with the topic, and particularly how I am thinking about homelessness, how I'm thinking about individuals that are experiencing homelessness, how language can be an opportunity to re-engage and to think more deeply.
Interesting. Almost like it can be it's a trigger to experience some discomfort, some cognitive dissonance that can create the opportunity for a stick with it moment, for a chance for you to think, okay, well, why am I feeling this way?
Right.
What is uncomfortable about this? You know, houseless is such a weird sounding word to me that if I'm reading an article or hearing an interview and someone says houselessness, it stops me. And it also like maybe it doesn't conjure the same images that the word homelessness does, because that's a word that I'm so familiar with. And so it kind of interrupts maybe the whatever, the biases might be in work or whatever flow or whatever assumptions, just long enough maybe to cause me to re-engage. I love the way you said that.
Yeah. And like even more than that now, like after I listened to that interview, I sort of kept reading these other articles and blogs about this same topic. And instead of like even just a small moment of pausing, I sat with those thoughts for a little bit and thought about like, why is this person using this specific language? What is that saying about their perspective in general? And how do I feel about that? What does that say about me when I use this language or decide maybe that's not the way I want to say it, or maybe it doesn't feel as tight as it needs to be? It was a good opportunity for me to just sit in it.
James, thank you for sharing your story today. I appreciate it. And thanks for your great work on that episode. If people haven't checked it out, they really should. There's a lot of really interesting and frankly very inspiring stories about ways that we can actually overcome our sense of hopelessness about this issue that is such a problem for so many of our communities.
Yeah, it's a great episode. People should check it out.
Thanks to the whole team for sharing their stories today. If you have had a stick with it moment recently, I'd love to hear about it. Email topofmind@byu.edu. And I have some exciting news. We are turning these stick with it conversations into a new podcast. It's called Uncomfy, Sticking with Moments That Challenge Us. Starting in July, we'll have a new guest each week, sharing a story about a time when they chose to stay uncomfortable and get curious about a challenging perspective or situation. We'll learn together how to do the same thing in our daily lives. I'm so excited to get uncomfy with you every week starting in July. And don't worry, Top of Mind is not going anywhere. We're still tackling tough topics in a way that will help us practice sticking with perspectives that challenge us. The only difference is that we are switching to every other week. So join me right here in 2 weeks for a brand new episode of Top of Mind. And it's a biggie. We're digging into what whiteness means in America. I'll see you back here for that on May 13th. Top of Mind is a BYU radio production. It's produced by James Hoops, Samuel Benson, Alayna Beck, Amber Mortensen, Vanessa Goodman, and me. And our sound design and audio engineering team includes Trent Reimschissel, Brandon Lewis, Kelsey Ney, Carly Wilson, and Josh Fouts. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon. Hey friends, I would like to take just a moment and introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's The Lisa Show. Lisa Valentine Clark is the host. She's a comedian, actress, believer, single mom. And the show delves into the multitude of challenges that shape our lives, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, social issues. Lisa and the Council of Moms will tackle it and do it with a lot of laughs along the way as we attempt to figure out this thing called life. So check out The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get podcasts.